We are glad that you have tuned in to join in our conversation today. Welcome. My name is Lola, and I have with me here my girlfriend Tosi. Tosi, say hi.
Hi.
And we are also happy to have a couple of guests with us today. This is so exciting. Not the first time we've had guests of this caliber in our midst, but we are very excited to say because we have a couple of reps from the Gen Z here with us today, Ore, Firibami, Yimika, and Sarah. So if you can please introduce yourselves. We'll start with Yimika.
Hi, I'm Yumika. I just finished my first year of university and I study religion, politics, and philosophy.
Great, thank you. Sarah.
Hello, my name is Sarah. I'm about to enter into my last year of university, and I am studying secondary education and international relations.
Great, Ore.
Hi, I'm Ore. I just finished my second year, so going into my third year, and I'm studying health science.
Great, and Firibami.
Hello guys, my name is Fiore Bami. I'm going into my second year and I'm currently studying cybersecurity systems.
Great. Thank you guys for joining us today. We're so very excited. For those that are new to this show and to this forum, My Take is a forum where we hang out, unwind, and chat about happenings around us while lending our voices to some of the social issues that are happening in the world today. Our goal is to promote a culture of love and compassion, as well as truth and candidness. So, on today's episode, it's actually a part two of our last show where we talked about generational differences. And we're continuing that with that conversation. And today we're talking about navigating generational differences in faith and culture. We're having a conversation with our Gen Zs, and this is part of our When Life Happens series that is for this season. So, as always, we would love for our audience to chime in with your comments in the chat. We'll definitely love to hear from you. So, let's get started. As I mentioned earlier, we started this conversation last episode with some Gen X parents. Gen X, for those who don't keep track of these things, are those that are born between 1965 and 1980. So many of the Gen Z parents are of the Gen X generation. Gen Zs are those that are born between 1997 and 2012. So those that are between the 11 to 26-year-old range. Although, there's argument in my house that the 20-year-olds don't want to associate with the 11-year-olds, but that's the bracket in which we have the Gen Z. So on that last episode, we talked about what is known as a generational gap, which is differences of outlook, attitudes, or opinions between people of different generations. So when it comes to values and attitudes and expectations, are we really all that different from each other? This generation, are you that different from the older generation or the younger generation? Let's start with Ore. What do you think?
Hi again, everybody. I feel like we are a little bit different from the Gen X type of generation because like we're more aware of like social problems and like cultural problems. I feel like we are more sensitive to and like inclusivity and like diversity and like even I was talking with someone from the Gen X generation and they were saying how like in the workspace like we know like that we know what we want, so if you're not paying us enough, like we're like, all right, let me go on to the next thing, like you're not giving me what I want. But older generations would work till they couldn't anymore, or they will hustle till they couldn't anymore, and they would just take what they were given. They would just take what, like, whether it's disrespect or whether it's like anything, they would take what they're given, and we don't stand for that at all. Like now I feel like we're different. in that way too.
Okay. And do you all agree with that, or why do you think that is? Why do you think you guys' perspective is that way? And
Um,
any of you can contribute to that. Yeah, Sarah.
I think that it comes. I don't. I think maybe it's a lack, and I don't want to claim that a certain generation has more of a scarcity mindset. I don't want to claim that, but I do think it comes from our generation is more like there's always going to be more options, and there's always like there's money in so many places that we don't have to stick with a place that makes us unhappy. And I think it's like perhaps our generation prioritizes our individual happiness more than what we view as stability. And I think that we view that like it'll be okay. Like we're going to find that stability. We're going to find a source of income. We're going to find success. And we don't have to be unhappy to get there. Where I think previously, and not that it's necessarily wrong, but there is more of an ideology that like, if you work hard in one place, you might be unhappy for a season, but eventually that it'll work out and you'll be fine. Whereas we would rather just find another place where we're happy in the present.
Okay. Yimika, I know you wanted to say something to that. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with both Ora and Sarah. I think more in like the cultural aspect that Ora touched upon. I think we're exposed to a lot more things and different lifestyles. So because we've been exposed to so much more, we've kind of forced ourselves to be a bit more educated. Whereas I feel like Gen X hasn't really had that exposure. I don't think any generation really had that level of exposure that we have up until now. So I think we have been able to educate ourselves also from a place of love rather than a place of judgment. We're educating ourselves so that we can be more mindful of others rather than, insensitive towards different people. So I think the more liberal aspect is where there's a massive difference between the two generations.
Yeah, I really like that point you brought up. I mean, you all three brought up great points, but I really agree with the point you brought up, Yumika, about exposure. I think you guys are so much more exposed to things. You're so much more aware of what the different options are. I mean, when we were growing up, and Tosin can probably attest to that, we knew 5 or 6 options. That was passed. You can be this, you can be this, you can be this, and you can be this. We didn't see all the other things that people could do. We weren't exposed to that. And so our choices were very limited. Piribami, what are your thoughts on that?
No, I definitely agreed with what all they said. I feel like we do have a lot more opportunities in this generation that we are in now than the generation that was then. And then I
Yeah.
feel like we should just take use of all these opportunities that we're given, and you know, so I don't think
Mhm.
anything is more different when it comes to the opportunity and expectation size.
And I just want to add, I agree with every one of you. In our generation, we were taught to be quiet, we were taught to accept what we were dealing with. But in your generation, we have encouraged you guys to speak your mind and speak your voice and say how you're feeling. And, so that's what has enabled you guys to be like, you know what, I really don't like this. But even when we were growing up, if we didn't like something, we were trained to deal.
So Sarah brought up this point about happiness versus security, and I always find that interesting. And I counter ask that thought to say, do you think that your ability to focus on happiness versus security is because your parents have been able to provide that security for you? So it's not something that you have to worry about because you know that there's a fallback. I know, you know, my dad and mom are going to be there. If this doesn't work out, I know someone has my back. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I definitely agree. I think that we have privilege.
Sorry, Tosin, can you mute yeah, thank you. Go ahead.
I definitely agree. I think that we have the privilege to be able to prioritize our happiness because we are already secure for the most part and we do have like something to lean back on. But at the same time, I think that that's the goal. Like you're meant to hope for your children to live life better than you and that they can afford to prioritize their happiness because they have you to fall back on. So I think that should like, and also for eventually our future children, we would hope that they're even more secure than we are. So I think that yes, that's the case, but like I think it's a good thing.
Ori.
I also think that in this age of we become more aware of mental health, and our mental health is like, I think in older generations, mental health was a thing where like it wasn't talked upon. It wasn't like there was no exposure to it. It was just like whatever you feel is whatever you feel, but keep that. And now in this age of like social media, like mental health is like a really big thing. So finding happiness or finding something that brings you peace is very normalized, as we may say, and it that's like what we prioritize more.
That's so
I have a piggyback question.
yeah.
Do you guys feel? Because I feel, in my from my generation, that a lot of you feel very self-entitled. What do you guys think about that? Yimika?
I think of like entitlement. Just why should do you know what I mean? Like I
Sorry,
shouldn't.
hold your thought for a second. Chrissy, can you mute
Sorry.
yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's a think of like, why should I have to suffer? Like, there is no need in this life for me to suffer in anything. Not in a job, not in a degree, not in a marriage, not in anything in this life. There's no need for me to suffer. I don't think it's a necessary thing of self entitlement. It's just I shouldn't have to make myself feel sad or feel depressed going to a job just to get money when there's a job I could do that will bring me happiness. I shouldn't feel sad in a marriage when there's someone who would make me happy. Do you know what I mean? So I would rather be in a state of happiness and prioritize my mental health, not from a place of entitlement, but from a place of just why would I want to be sad? Do you know what I'm saying? I just think that's what it is.
Great point. Anybody else want to add a thought to that?
I have a thought. I think that I agree with you, Mika. I don't think it's necessarily a sense of self entitlement, but rather of like self value. Like, not that other generations don't value themselves, but I think it's a thing of like, we know that there's stuff out there that we are worthy of, like worthy of joy, worthy of peace, worthy of self contentment. And so I think that the idea of, oh, Gen Z is self entitled, I think that it comes from an idea that we haven't had to work for anything, and that there's things that we just haven't had to endure. But I think that what we've had to endure is just simply different than what the generation previously to us had to endure. Like, even when it comes to us having social media, like in us having access to so many other things, while that is a privilege, it also is like the type of, like, as Ora mentioned before, the type of mental health issues that we might have to encounter, the type of situations that we're in are situations that the generations previous never had to be in, never had to see literally the whole rest of the world every day and what they're doing and who they're talking to and how successful they are. Like, they didn't have to see all these people every day. And we have those type of issues. And I think that we endure, maybe not in the same way, but we're still enduring so many other issues that we face on the daily. And so when we value our happiness and we value our joy, I think it's a positive thing that we want this for ourselves. And so I think that the generation previous should also be happy that we're happy. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. So you're not enduring any more or less. You're just enduring differently. There's different challenges from the previous generations. Okay. So can you share examples of differences in how this generation approaches aspects of their lives differently? So when you think about your approach to faith, your approach to friendships, school, career paths, social issues, maybe each of you can just give one example of a scenario where y'all thought of it this way, or you approached it this way, we approach it this other way. And let's start with Yimika and then round robin it.
So I think I'll speak on education. I think that we come from a culture, as like Nigerians in an African culture, where there's a very traditional thinking that you have to either be in STEM, you got to be a doctor, you got to be a lawyer, you got to be an economist, this, that, and the third, in order to be successful. And I felt like if I'm going to take myself as an example, I feel like if I'm going to do a degree and pay £30,000, I don't want to suffer my degree. I want to be happy. I want to do something that I enjoy. So when I was choosing a degree, my mom was like, okay, well, you should be a lawyer. I don't want to be a lawyer. Okay, you should go into this field. I don't want to do that field. I said what would make me most happy is if I studied philosophy, if I studied religion, and politics too, but like those are the things that make me happy. And it took a lot for my parents to like be like, what? Because it's like it's so not traditional because I felt like my happiness comes first in any degree. When it comes to choosing a job and stuff, opportunities will open up to me and I can use my field and my degree in any field because it can like, it's like it can do anything. But I felt like if I was going to do a degree, I wanted to do something that made me happy. And I think that's somewhere where we disagree because it's no longer just about the traditional route. Even when it comes to education, you don't have to go to university. You can do like other different ways. There are more than one path to success. And I think that's something our generation understands in comparison to Gen X, in my personal opinion.
All right. Anybody else can jump in. All right, let me go to Ori. You go next.
I feel like in terms of how we view like racial issues or like culture or like um things that happen in this world that are deemed as negative or bad, Gen X has a mindset of yes, it's been happening, that's bad, but like we should shut up about it because that's just the way life is. And we have come into this place of no, let's change that. Let's try to change that and let's try to make life better. Like I think we have a mindset of like make life better for us because we're living in it and I don't want anybody to live the way that I wouldn't want to live. So in terms of like making money or um other people's mental health, we always try to like let people feel comfortable in their own skin and in their own like pathway and like we don't have a world of like I would say generally we don't have a world of judgment. Like we don't have a generation where we judge everybody for if you don't want to be like for example, Yumika said if you don't want to be a lawyer, we're not going to be like, wow, the fact that you don't want to be a lawyer is crazy. Like that, you're not going to be successful. We have like many different ways to get there, you know?
Thank you. Firibami, I'd be interested in hearing you're the only guy in the bunch here, and we don't get to hear from guys too often about their perspective. So
Yeah.
I'm going to pull you out here and say, maybe give an example of where your approach is different from maybe your parents' approach, or even other adults you've come across.
Yeah. I feel like in this generation today, especially when it comes to mental health awareness, especially when it comes to guys in general, most guys today are more able to talk about the importance of mental healthness, of their well-being, everything going on in their situation today. Where it comes to in the older generations, they just usually bottle it up or they don't feel comfortable talking about it because they feel like it makes them lower as a man. But I feel like I love in this generation today, we're able to talk about it, we're able to express it, and be able to seek help or counseling or just therapy to get through it and push to be a better person every day.
I love that. I love that. That is so true. I mean, when I think about my generation, that is definitely true. And we were an improvement over our father's generation, where they couldn't even say "I love you" back when you say "I love you," or
Exactly.
hug or anything. Like my dad, we used to force him into hugging us, and we knew he loved us. He just wasn't expressive. And
Right.
with our generation, we're better with that, but we're nowhere near where you guys are, where you're able to verbalize and express, look, I'm not okay and I need help. So I'm very glad you brought that up. Sarah, your thoughts?
I think that one way that I see differences a lot is just when it comes to like overall advice. That like when I ask our parents like what should we do in this certain situation, that's when I usually clock like, oh wait, like we are not coming from the same place here. I think, for example, I'll be like, oh, I'm looking for a job. I filled out these applications online, blase, blase. And my dad will be like, well, just go up to the place and tell them to hire you. And I'll be like, I don't think that that's how it works. Or I think what deepens it as well is the fact, in comparison to maybe the typical American or English person who their parent grew up in the same neighborhood as them and went to the same school, whether it was 15, 20 years prior. But I think as part of the diaspora where our parents grew up in another location than us as well, it just adds to the fact of like, oh, we are not understanding each other when it comes to this conversation. And we grew up in completely different contexts. So the way that we see the world it just looks different. And I think that shows a lot when I ask for advice, whether it's about a job or about relationships. And it's just like, oh, I would never do that.
Yeah. How does this play out with friendships, like relationships? You talked about relationships and friendships. I mean, one area where I have no idea how you guys operate is that dating relationship space. It's like we use the word dating and it means something totally different from me than it does from you guys. Like, how are you navigating that aspect with the older generation? Um, how is that different in your world?
I think that with our parents, perhaps it's like intentions are more clear in the very beginning. And so sometimes when I'm talking about like to my mom about like, okay, this guy, whatever, and she'd be like, well, if he's trying to be your husband, I'm like, who's talking about husband? Like, that's not what we're talking about. But I think that it's that like immediately seriousness with intention, that not that people in our age don't date with intention, but it just almost seems like too quick of a jump. And I'm like, I just got to know this person, and it's automatically like, well, if he's not this, then you obviously couldn't marry him. And I'm like, who's talking about marrying him? And so I think that that probably is what I've noticed a lot.
Also, I feel like in terms of people, like when you're thinking about that, they a lot of relationships end in divorce. So our generation now is like, why would I want to jump into something when it could possibly end in divorce like quickly? So we like kind of like back up and we're like, okay, let's take into account of everything that like every single thing, because it's like we can't just say that, oh, love will conquer all, because it doesn't. We know that like financial problems and other situations could mess up a relationship. So we're like, let's take a step back and let's see how this is going, if their intentions are good, all of that stuff.
I also want to jump in.
Sorry, Yumika, go ahead.
It's a thing of I feel like a lot of older generations, I feel like they just thought like love is good enough for a relationship. And that's not the case anymore, in my personal opinion. It's not just about love. I'm so sorry, but it's also financial. It's also, have you healed? There's just too many different aspects, like, and it's also like compatibility. There's too many different things that go into a relationship nowadays in comparison to before. Like, if you're not financially stable and I'm not financially stable, there's no need for us to enter into a marriage if we're gonna take it there. Because unless both of us can like get it together, how do you expect us to have kids for them to go into a situation where it's not like good money wise? Like, let's just be a bit for real. It's more than just love. And I think, especially, I feel like for me as a woman as well, I'm looking for something that's a bit more, it's not just about love anymore. You need to like tick a couple of boxes before we try and take something seriously. And I'm not speaking on now, that's on later. In terms of like us now, I feel like our dating pool, for lack of better terms, just isn't that great. I think if we're just being incredibly honest, situationships are on the rise and it's a disgrace. But that's just the truth of the matter. So no one's trying to jump into anything when you're jumping into something with someone and they'll have three other girls on the other line. And that's how you'll be there crying and crying and crying. It's not necessary. So dating is something that's a bit more like, because you don't know whether someone's serious. Someone could say I love you, but be with someone else the next day. Do you know what I mean? So it's a bit more, there's a lack of intentionality and there's more of a focus on things outside of just love, I feel like, for our generation.
Also,
Okay, quick question. And this is a concern for me, based on a situation that happened in December with a bunch of Gen Zs. Are you? Do you think you guys are welcoming marriage or interested in marriage? Speaking generally now.
I feel I think yeah. I mean, it sounds fun. Do you know what I mean? Like it sounds like it's cute. It's something to do, you know. People you want to have the well, for I'm speaking for myself, you want to have, the husband, the kids, travel, etc., etc. But it's not something that I don't need to be married by the time I'm 24, kids by 26, spend the rest of my life with someone. When I could get married when I'm a bit older, have more money, take some time, travel, do things between me and my partner before we do the whole little settle down thing. It's more of a marriage later down the line. It's not something that is as rushed, especially because I feel like us as women have more opportunities. I don't think women had that many opportunities back then. So marriage was something that was good for their stability. We can be stable on our own now. So we don't need a man to the degree in which no shade of it. People in older generations needed a man. Do you know what I mean? So it's like not something that's the goal. It's just something to do, if that makes sense.
Also, I feel like marriage was used as a thing to be like you're successful if you get married. Like that's the goal. If you're not married, you're not you haven't completed life. Like, and in our generation, we're like, that's not. I can be successful without being married. Like, I could. It like if it happens, yes, that's good. That's a good thing. But that shouldn't be my factor to like, oh, my way of life is that I have to do this, and then get married, and then that's when I'll finally complete life. I feel like we have like changed that.
Sarah, you want to add to that?
Oh yeah, I definitely agree with what Yumika and Ora have said. I think previously, for a woman at least, getting married was almost like a sense of independence slash freedom because you get to leave your father's house and join like and be more independent in your husband's house. Leave and start your adult life. But I feel like almost in our generation, getting married is almost a lack of freedom because you're already independent, you're already living your best life. And then to go into some man's house, I just feel like it demonstrates less freedom, whereas before it kind of demonstrated more freedom. Like now you're an adult and now you're independent. And so now it's like if you find someone you want to get married to, then yes, get married. But marriage in itself is not like a goal of life anymore, I think.
Bami.
I feel like it can come with a lot of different things. I feel like if you come into marriage, you can come in with a lot of different mindsets. I feel like you can come into a marriage with the mindset of to grow and to build each other up. I feel like when a woman comes into a man's house, it could be to help grow the man, or to help grow the woman as well. So I feel like it depends on what mindset you're coming and what you plan to gain on the marriage.
Thank you guys so much. That was for me. That was very enlightening. I mean, I just needed to hear you guys. We know that this series is about when life happens, and all over the news there are frequent talks about Gen Z challenges, the stress, the social disconnection, and their worry about the future. And there's a recent study about by Cigna. 91% of Gen Zs report feeling stressed, and 98 said that they feel burnt out. And we've come across young adults whose response to this is to engage in destructive behaviors, addiction, trouble with the law, and so much more. And parents are struggling to navigate this terrain. What do you guys wish the older generation would understand about these issues and the causes? Frebami, I want to start with you again.
Yeah. I feel like it can be tough growing up in a world that's constantly changing and throwing new challenges our way like every day. And I feel like the older generations have their own issues and their own expectations and experiences. But I feel like they need to start to understand the issues and different stuff that we're facing, and what worked for them might not even work for us. I feel like sometimes that we even try to reach out for help, and instead of getting the support that we need, we can get labeled as troublemakers or bad kids, and that can even push them away even more. So I feel like finding somebody who actually gets it, or finding somebody who listens without like judgment, or who actually genuinely wants to help us get through it, can really be important. I know mental health is a crucial and big thing in the world today. I know older folks just usually brushed it off, or not really saw it as a big deal. But sometimes somebody can actually be dealing with anxiety, depression, or any other stuff that we don't even know how to handle ourselves. So one can even turn to stuff like even drugs or addiction to escape or feel overwhelmed from those feelings. So it's not always about the surface things. Sometimes it can be about digging deeper into the thing or understanding why these things are even done in the first place. So just taking time to get to really know and see the potential in those people, because sometimes they're actually not just lost cause, because at the end of the day everybody has potential and everybody has strengths, and we all had to discover our purposes.
I
Also, oh,
Oh, sorry. Just quickly say, I wholeheartedly agree with what he said. I think he literally hit the nail on the head. I think something as well. I know this may be slightly controversial, but there's also, I feel like, a lot of I speak specifically Black children. There's a lot of signs of neurodivergence. Children who are young Black children, and the signs are easily missed. So someone could be like they could have ADHD, ADD, etc., etc., and they'll be exhibiting these traits from young, but they'll be like, oh yeah, they're a troublemaker, and then they just like he said, different things. So when these things go like unhelped, it could just get worse over time. And because people, I feel like a lot of this may be controversial. Maybe a lot of Black parents are quick to like, no, there's nothing wrong with my child. Like my child's fine. They won't get the child the help that they may need in order for them to do well and progress. Like specifically, if you talk about education, because if they were able to get the help they needed, they could do so much better in their education. But because of the labels and the stigmas, which are also low key rooted in racism, but that's a conversation for another day, they may not get the help they needed. So I feel like if parents are more willing to listen and to also see what could be the root causes of certain issues, a lot of these things could get dealt with. I know that's like a generalization, but I feel like that's one of the things that could be touched upon.
also coming from like a Christian household where it's like, oh, God will help you, or if you feel this way, if you're depressed, then that's a plan of the enemy, or all of that stuff. Like, it still doesn't change the fact that like the children are going through that, and it feels like that, oh, like I'm not gonna wanna, like, let's, God forbid, if I have something, I'm not gonna wanna come to my parents about it, or I'm not gonna wanna tell them, because I feel like when I did tell them, it was pushed upon. So like, how do I handle this? Like, I feel like also the older generations are more judgmental. So if they see like children on drugs, or they see children acting out, they're like, oh, it's because of your phone, or it's because you don't listen, or it's because lack of discipline. And maybe that's their cry of help. Like, the way they're acting is their cry of help, is like, maybe you'll like listen to me more, or maybe you will understand me more if I show you. Or like, if a child is quiet, and it's like, oh, why don't you want to talk to your parents? Why? It's never like, oh, what's going on with you? What's the issue? What are you dealing with? It's like, oh, you don't want to talk to us anymore, or you don't want to hang out with us anymore. And then it's like overlooked. And so children feel, and especially in this age when we're developing and we're growing, and we haven't reached that 25 age yet, like we're fully developed, we're still trying to figure ourselves out. It's hard because we don't know where like our emotional stability lies in. So
Yeah, I really agree with everything that everyone has said. And I think that when a parent like invalidates their kid's emotions and how they feel, their kid is not going to stop feeling that way. They're just going to stop telling their parent about it. And so they're going to tell either someone else about it or something else about it. And and you're just going to feel the disconnect is just going to grow because they feel like they can't come to you with what they're dealing with. And I think that that invalidation doesn't just come with in the words that a parent says directly to their kid, oh, you shouldn't feel that way. Oh, you're being dramatic. But I think it even comes from the way that their parents talk about other people. I think the way their parents talk about other people of our age that they see might be suffering, or oh, did you hear so and so's kid? They say they're depressed. What can they be depressed about? Like your kid is always listening to you, you know. And so it's not even about the words you say directly to your kid when they come to you, but the things you talk about in general, how you view the world, how you view mental health issues, even as Yumika was saying, neurodivergency, not just in ADHD and ADD, but I think even when it comes to depression and anxiety, and I think a lot of like our parent generation's initial reaction is, what could you be anxious about? What, you don't you have food to eat? Don't you have electricity in your house? You know, some people, they don't have a place to live. And it's like, okay, valid, but I'm not going to come to you with my issue anymore. If I feel like if I'm going to come to you, it's going to make it worse. And a lot of parents are suffering the effects of that disconnect now.
Okay, I want to also ask, what is one advice you'll give my generation in helping out with what you guys all went around talking about?
Honestly, I think that it's just about love and listening. Those two things just make a massive difference. When your child comes to you and says something, listen to them. Just listen. Listening makes a massive difference. And when you respond, I think one thing also it could come from education, but just speaking from a place of love rather than judgment. Like you may not think you come across as judgmental, but I can hear the judgment in your voice when you're speaking and in your expressions. So when you listen and you show your child that you love them and that you want to help work through it with them, there will be more of a sense of comfort, more of a trust rather than the disconnect.
Additionally, I think that the initial sadness or maybe the frustration or the anger should not be read as attitude. I think a lot of times it's like you might be having a bad day. You came from work or school and you're just not having a great day. And then you're interacting with your family based off you not having. And I'm not talking about being disrespectful. I'm just talking about when a kid is upset or when you're as a young adult, you angry or something happened to you. And then it's read as, why aren't you happy? And the unhappiness is read as an attitude, or the unhappiness is read as the problem instead of what's wrong, are you okay? It's what's wrong with you. And I think that is automatically something like that one change in question of how are you feeling, what's going on, can already change the dynamic of the conversation in the first place, I think.
Yep.
Thank you so much for your moment.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what everybody is saying. I feel like it's very important to create a safe place where young adults like feel free to express their feelings without having to think about any punishment or any rejection with their parents or how they feel. So it's very important to just create a safe place and foster an environment without judgmental or non-judgmental communication. Safe place.
I would just like to add on to that. Now that we're growing and we have a lot more people in the world of psychology and those type of majors, therapy is not a bad thing. I'm saying it. Therapy like is not a bad thing, and a lot of like older generations feel like, oh, why would you tell your problems to someone outside of our house? Why would you tell your problems to someone else? And therapy could actually help like children and even adults, like even to have a group like therapy session or something like.
Okay, we want to take a question from the chat, and it says, "How can parents really find out the root cause of these issues?" I know that you guys are not, professionals yet or whatever, but if you guys have any ideas, how can parents really find out the root cause of these issues, and what kind of questions will break the ice?
I feel like I feel like sometimes it's not even the parent. Like sometimes the son or the child doesn't even feel comfortable to speak to the parent. So even asking the question of, do you feel like is there somewhere outside of the family? Is there somebody you feel like you could talk to? It could be an uncle, it could be an auntie, it could be your father's friend, or just somebody outside the family. And another question that you could ask is you can actually deteriorate from the actual issue. Like, is there any goals you have in life? Is there any aspirations that you have? Or just dictating from the actual conversation to make them feel comfortable first before just immediately rushing into the root cause. Are you feeling good? All that.
Thank you.
I,
I wanted to.
if I can jump in real quick, I have a follow-up question.
Okay.
So one of the things that I've observed with this generation is your willingness to put like everything out there on social media, which, like your thoughts, your innermost thoughts is like your things that we just like I'm always having an argument with my children about, like for about me, you're in cybersecurity. I'm like, do you know how much of your information, told them this, told them this, told them this, told them this, they could, AI is coming. tell me about y'all's need and and comfort with doing that. With I guess there's not a question. I'm just curious as to your thoughts around your comfort in putting all your information out there on the interwebs.
I think me personally, I I'm not one for oversharing with the internet because I think it can just come back to haunt you. And I think there are levels. I think sometimes people just take it just a tad bit too far. But I also think from maybe outside looking in, I think some people feel like they have no one in their lives that they can talk to. So if they talk on like the internet, you will find someone who can relate to your situation and you will find someone who's willing to help and can take the time to listen to you. So I think that's a reason why people may do it. I'm not really an advocate for it in certain scenarios, but I understand why sometimes people just want to feel heard.
Yeah, I agree with her. I would say that, like, okay, sharing your pregnancy or sharing where you're gonna, like, the flight details of where you're traveling, that's a little much. But there's times where, like, I've learned a lot from, like, social media, like, where I could feel like, oh, I'm not the only person who goes through this situation. And if I didn't go on, or if someone didn't share their story, I'm thinking like I'm the only one who goes through this, like I'm alone in this and stuff like that. So social media does help a lot. Like, I know it's more deemed as negative, but like in certain situations it does help a lot if someone didn't share their story. First of all, they feel like they wouldn't feel heard because other people may not have heard them, but like people on social media have become like their so-called family to hear them and have like validated their feelings or made them feel heard, and they could also help other people. And because we're always with our phones, like we're always with our phones, we go everywhere with it, and if we're not socializing, we're with our phones. So like it you learn a lot of stuff as well.
I think before we even get into the conversation of, oh, why does Gen Z like to overshare on the internet, we have to realize that our definitions of oversharing are very different. I think that, for example, if I post something on like my close friend's Instagram story that has 10 people, and my mom is like, well, why did you tell your friends that? To me, that's not oversharing because it's the same as y'all's WhatsApp chat. Like it's the same amount of people. Like it's just on a different platform. And so I think we must define oversharing. If I was like talking to like a whole bunch, like 1,000 people on Instagram live, da 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 da, about intimate details about my life, yes, that would be oversharing. And I definitely do think that some people of our generation do have a habit of oversharing. But I think that we must define exactly what oversharing is, you know? Like especially Nigerians, there's a lot of things like don't tell people your future plans, don't tell this, da 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 da. But if I'm like, oh, I'm about to go on holiday, to my parents or their generation, that might be oversharing. But to me, it really isn't because I haven't said anything deep or personal. So I think we have to define what oversharing is before we get into like why our generation does it or doesn't do it. Because I don't think that we really do overshare. And I think that if we look into, our generation, how they used to use Facebook back in the day, we could have the same question. So I don't know.
I definitely feel like this conversation opens a whole new topic for like validation and like attention. Definitely, I feel like even ourselves, we post for feedback from our peers, and if it's just to boost our self esteem, I feel like we're gonna do it.
Thank you all so much. That was very, very interesting. And which is true. I mean, Sarah hit it on the nail. We have to define what oversharing is. Because I know that I get backlash from my mom when I do certain things. So, and then on to you guys, so it's true. All right. I know, all of you are from Christian backgrounds, and there's this verse in the Bible, John 3, is it John 4, confesses that he finds no greater joy than to hear that his children are walking in truth. But in the times we're living in, there's a lot of confusion on what the truth is. And the chasm between the values and the culture that many parents and our church hold dear and that of their children is becoming wider. There's a lot of confusion all over the place. What are your thoughts about how this gap in values is impacting the parent child relationship and also your faith walk with God? Sarah, you could start.
This is something that I actually have a lot of thoughts on, but I'm gonna condense it. Um, I think two main things. I think a lot about the scripture that says, like, train up your child in the way that they should go, and when they grow old, they will not depart from it. And I think that two things that I take from that scripture. The first thing is that there's a promise there that they won't depart from it, but I feel like the training of like your child, and then when they grow old, that there's a gap between child and when they grow old. And so allowing a kid to like, or a young adult in that in between to figure life out for themselves, I think it's part of that. Like, even when you look at the prodigal son, like the father didn't say he couldn't go, he didn't hold him hostage in the house, like let him figure his life out and then eventually come back. And then secondly, I do think that this idea of departing from faith, I think that in itself is a tricky subject as well. You know, I could talk to an auntie and she might see a guy in church and he has dreads and an earring, and she'd be like, look at him, I thought he was Christian. But that has nothing to do with whether or not he still has faith or not. But I think a lot of like physical displays of how we choose to present ourselves to a lot of the older generation looks like we're straying from our faith. But you don't know anything about that person's internal values, how they connect with God at all. But just from the way they present themselves, there's this perceived like fall from grace that I think sometimes comes from a place of judgment rather than a place of love. So that's, I don't know, that's where I'll start off.
I feel like the older generations are just a tad bit more black and white. It was either it's this or that, whereas I feel like we are more fluid in our generation, for lack of better terms. Therefore, truth is something that we have to figure out as we walk on this life. I think from a faith perspective, when it's like battling between what the Bible says and what society says, it's a point of contention, and you have to really take the time to figure it out for yourself. Hopefully, we'll come back to, Christian perspective, but sometimes we take certain things and we have to grow for ourselves. I think with the parent-child relationship, I feel like the parent needs to give their child a bit of leeway to figure out their own space. I think all of us, especially we're in college, this is a time where we also figure out ourselves a lot, and we should get a bit of grace to be able to make mistakes and walk this journey. Because at the end of the day, it's our lives, and we have to figure out what the truth is for ourselves. And hopefully, we come back to a Christian place of, Jesus, I'm the way, the truth, and hopefully that's where we end up. But sometimes we just pick up different things along the way, and we should be able to have the space to do so.
Yeah, I definitely think that question was a deep topic. I know, like growing up myself, like it was just go to church, get ready, let's go to church. But it's like, do I really know God? Why is the reason I'm going to church for? Like when I got into college and I wasn't going to church anymore, it was like, why am I going to church? Why did I go to church? Do I like God? What is my relationship on God? So just taking that path and learning myself was really deep. And then coming back home and being open, having that open communication with my parents, definitely, it's definitely great. So going on my own path, having that path by myself, and then helping and having counsel with my parents was it's definitely great.
Also, I feel like in terms of when parents are like, you have to do this or you can't do this, it's not going to make the child want to listen. Like, it's not going to make the child be like, oh, yeah, because my parents said so, I'm going to do this, especially when other people in our generation are doing those things. It's just going to make us do it behind like their back, in terms like we want to, at our young age, we want to like be rebels or whatever. But there's a there's a blurred line between judgment and love, and judgment is like kind of mistaken for love in some situations and in some points. So if a child feels like, oh, my parent is going to judge me, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it in front of them. I'm just going to do it behind their back. And so I think coming from a place where it's like, okay, I understand, I'm telling you this, but let's have an open communication if you wanted to do it or why you want to do it, or let's talk about it. And that will give them like more of a place to like understand where you're coming from or why you're telling them that, versus like why they want to do it or why they will want to do whatever.
Okay, before I hear what Auntie Lola has to say, I just want to say that yes, I hear everything that you guys are saying. It's just that as a parent, because we've been through experiences, and I know that our generations are completely different. But because we've been through experiences, we're trying to make sure that you guys don't fall into pit holes that we fell in. There's a lot of wisdom that we feel we have that, if you guys came to us, you would find out that yes, we have had similar experiences and all. So it's difficult to see your child go through the same pitfalls or same heartbreaks, same issues. So that's why it's a little bit difficult for us parents to chew when we see that, some kids are heading in a path that we feel might not be right. But I totally hear everything you're saying. Antilola?
Yeah, so we have a question in the comments where I think it was referring back to what Firibami had mentioned earlier about validation, and I know there's a whole box we can open up with that. And this conversation is getting so good. We're running out of time. Like I feel like at some point we're going to have a part 3 to continue this because we don't get to hear enough. There's not enough platforms where we get to hear and have this conversation between the generations, and we really get to understand where each other is coming from. But one of the questions here was, is there a concern when we are seeking information to affirm how we feel? So, I'm feeling this way, affirm how I feel, versus getting counsel. Are we at risk of getting the wrong counsel when that is our approach? So I'll start with Firibami and then the others chime in.
Yeah, I feel like when we seek information that aligns with the way we feel, it's called confirmation bias. And I feel like, yeah, definitely it could lead us to the wrong way or the wrong counsel. But at the end of the day, life is about making mistakes. So we make those mistakes and we learn better from the decisions that we make. And then we fact check and we look for better advice or better information. So it's just good to stay open to new ideas and not just to stick to what we already know, and to help us make better and smarter decisions and grow as individuals.
At what point do you guys feel like, as a parent, and this is very hard for a parent, and I always say, we always say that we never stop being parents. My mother still parents me, and I'm not young. So, parenting never stops. At what point would you say, and anyone can answer this question, that your parents keep trying, to advise, keep trying to counsel, keep trying to, versus backing off and letting you make your own decisions? In what scenario do we choose one or the other as a parent?
For me personally, I feel like it should be never. I feel like your
Mhm.
parent there should always be a good counsel, because there's no better person better than your parents to advise you better in life, because they already gone through decisions, they already gone through the mistakes, and they can always give you better counsel and better advice. Even though sometimes it's not the advice we want to hear, but at the end of the day, it's always the best thing for us.
Well, I also agree with that because like my grandmother still like tells my mom like certain things, and like it's not gonna stop. Like it's just gonna keep going. But also, where do you find that balance between like you can't always walk on a cloud. Like you can't always make your child make the right decision, and if they don't make those wrong decisions, how would they grow stronger from it, or how would they learn? If they haven't experienced heartbreak, for example, how would they know that like don't put your trust into everybody, or don't let everybody walk all over you if they didn't experience that hurt, or they didn't experience like, oh, friendship breakups, and they just like trust anybody and they let anybody into their house. Like we just have to find a balance between the the counsel, like parents giving their child like the right things to say, or like the right things to do, versus going through those heartbreaks or going through those mistakes to learn from them.
I agree with both of those takes. I also think that there's a difference between this is what I think you should do, and therefore that's the only thing you can do. Like you do that or that's it. Or this is what I think you should do. I've been through life, I know, but at the end of the day, you're going to do what you want to do. This is just what I think should happen. And I do think that there's an age in which it has to be the latter. Like it has to be like, I'm always going to give you advice. This is what I think is in your best interest, but you're an adult. So I think that there's an age where that happens. So not an age where the advice stops. I don't think there should ever be an age where like you can't listen to a word of wisdom from your parents, but I do think that there has to be space for agency at the same time.
Yamika, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. I agree with the whole point of agency. I think that exactly that was literally what I was gonna say. There's a place where your advice is good, it's warranted, it's needed, but you should also give me a bit of breathing space to make my own choices. And that's where I feel like it should end, for lack of better terms. That's where it should be.
It also makes us think, like it makes us think. It's not like a, oh, I have the decision made for me. It's like,
Mhm.
oh, now I'm taking in accountability. I'm taking in all of this advice to make my own decision. What should I do with that decision? Like I like children will listen to their parents more if they're like, oh, like what did my mom say? My mom literally told me da 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 da. Instead of my mom told me to do this and now I have to do it. And I, even if I don't want to do it, like you don't think about, like you're not thinking about the decision because it's like you're forced to do it. You're not like actually taking in all the advice because you're just like, oh, she just told me to do it. So
Yeah.
I agree with Laura's point, and I think also when it's the latter and you just do what your parents say all the time, it creates a bit of a dependency where you can't make a decision for yourself. At some point, you have to grow up a bit and say, what do I want to do? What do I think is best for me? And once you come to a place of independence, you have to start to make your own decisions. And if you're constantly relying on your parents, you'll just become just, I don't know, you won't necessarily be able to think for yourself. And that could lead to a lot of issues in many different areas down the line, especially when it comes to work, relationships, etc., etc. So I think there should be a bit of a balance there.
Mm, Fury Bunny, you had a thought?
No, I think everybody really much hit it on the nail. I was just gonna speak about like I know some of the times like when my parents have told me to do stuff in the past, it was just like I don't want to listen, I just want to hear it. But it's just down the line, I just remember all those stuff that I've been taught, and I just remember all those stuff, and it really applies to me, and it really helps me in my everyday life, like especially as I am now in college by myself.
So what I'm hearing you guys say is we should still continue our advice giving, nagging self, even if you guys roll your eyes, rebuff, you know,
Sadly.
all of that. We should still press on because at some point you might take it into consideration. You might hear it. You might take it into consideration now. You might listen now, or you might choose to just, you know,
Right.
listen to it later. Okay, I hear you.
Even though I'm not trying to hear it.
I hear you. All right. So we're already at the hour, and I really, really just appreciate. I'm looking at you guys, and I'm just like, wow. I can't believe. I mean, you guys are so full of wisdom, and you're so. I mean, I'm forced to see you guys as adults now, and I really want to say how much I appreciate. It is a hard transition, and I think Tosin will testify of us being able to change from our little babies that we, gave birth to now interacting with you as adult to adult, even though you're, in our eyes, you're adult in development. So we appreciate your coming on the show and talking to us. I think I wanted to end with, well, I don't know, Tosin, if you wanted to say something.
I think we can end with the last question we had in our minds.
Yeah. I wanted to know, how do you apply your faith on a day-to-day basis? Like, how are you able to align your faith walk with the current pressures of society? What works for you? We'll just end on that note if each of you can.
Who can I start?
Yeah. Yes, Yamika.
All right, but for me personally, I think it's the Holy Spirit, child. You need the Holy Spirit in each and every single thing, especially in this life. Even the smallest thing is, should I go here or should I go there? Should I go to this party? Should I not go to this party? You need the Holy Spirit to guide you in each and every single aspect, because the Lord knows more than we do. The Lord's omniscient, so we need just the reliance on the Holy Spirit in everyday life. In each and every single thing is just necessary, and just that quick, like, yo, Holy Spirit, like, should I go here? And if he says no, I say no. If he says yes, okay, I'll go. It's just simple things like that. And that's how I feel like it's best to like walk on this life.
And she took my answer.
Thank you. Ore or Sarah?
I think recently I've been really trying to get into like the word for myself, and like I'm in the Old Testament right now. I feel like I'm an Old Testament girly, like just getting into what God says himself. And like I think going to church and listening to sermons, there's so much value in that and it's good. But I think there's something about reading the Bible for yourself, and getting into God's word and having questions and asking those questions that has helped me a lot. And I just think that there's so many truths that we can apply to our life that you'll read in Genesis and you're like, oh wow, like somehow that relates to what I'm dealing with right now. And then secondly, I just think having close Christian friends that are your age. Like we've talked a lot about asking advice of our parents and seeking wise counsel from our parents. And I think that's valuable. But there is something about having a Christian community of your peers too that I think only further strengthens you.
All right.
One thing about me is that like even if I don't read my Bible every day or stuff, me and God, like that communication is like good. Like it's like this because like every time like I'm feeling like anxious or like I'm feeling stressed, I'm like, God, please, like what should I do in this situation? Like help me like figure out or tell me the way. And I think in our generation we look at signs a lot. We look at signs and we like see things and we're like, okay, I just prayed to God about this like yesterday. Why is it matching up? Like I never would have thought about that. And so just like actually like opening up your mind and opening up your eyes. And I think that having that relationship with God, like in terms of talking to him too, as well as like also, yeah, reading your Bible and everything, but having that relationship where you can just talk to him and you can just like cast your cares on him, as he says, it helps you, it helps a lot. It like just brings an inner peace also to me, and it helps me like in my everyday like life.
Thank you guys so very much. Ultimately, God is the parent, right? We're just help. He put you in our care, and you're gonna have kids, maybe not, that you'll go through this journey with as well. And so, thank you for your input. We really appreciate having you guys willing to come on the show and share with us today. And as you can see from the comments, your feedback, your opinions and thoughts were very valued. Um, to our audience, thank you for joining us. On our next episode of my take chat, we'll be talking about what's going on with the schools. There's a lot going on in our schools, with our schools, and we'll be delving deeper into when life happens in our schools. We would love all the audience members to tune in and stay connected with us on social media platforms. Everyone,
Before we go, I just want to say that hearing from you guys is just like an opportunity of where it's like baby bird fly, and that's what we have realized. I was telling my husband that we do the part that God wants us to play, and then the rest is up to Him with the next generation. We can't hover all over you guys all the time. But I'm very, very proud with what I've seen in this last hour. I've been proud of you guys anyway, but what I've seen in this last hour, you guys communicating how you feel and speaking on behalf of so many others, we truly appreciate you guys. And you guys are the light that God has let out there. And despite whether you find your way or you make your stumbles or whatever, I believe very strongly that God is depending on you guys. So thank you.
thank you, and thanks everyone for joining my take show. Say bye, everyone.
Bye.